Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into the crackling warmth of Edwardian England, an age of pocket watches, pressed trousers, and parlor games that made today's fidget spinners look like extreme sports. You're walking down a cobblestone street in 1906, your shoes slightly too tight, your collar even tighter. Through the lace-curtained window of a modest townhouse, you hear it, a high, trilling whistle, not from a kettle, not from a bird, but from a very serious-looking gentleman. In tweed. He stands poised before a polite audience of 12, their gloved hands folded, their attention rapt. He puckers his lips like a man about to deliver both an aria and a weather report. And off he goes, warbling out the chorus to a popular music hall tune, with perfect pitch and an expression of serene dignity. You blink. This is, apparently, the entertainment, and it is taken very seriously. You, my friend, have just wandered into the golden age of competitive whistling. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because the sheer earnestness might make you burst out laughing, and that would be deeply inappropriate here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, let me know your city and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where this sleepy little time machine travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your shoes creak softly on polished floorboards as you're ushered inside the genteel chaos of an Edwardian drawing room. The furniture is heavy and brocaded, like everyone's just one syllable away from swooning. There's a tray of tea cooling on the lace-covered table, and a faint floral perfume that smells like someone's aunt with very strong opinions. But everyone's attention is fixed on the man with the lips. He's doing a rendition of the Bluebells of Scotland, and by the third phrase, you begin to understand why this crowd is captivated. It's not just about the sound. It's about the control, the phrasing, the soft rolling of the notes, like marbles passed delicately over velvet. In this era, Edwardian men are expected to do many things: write letters with elegant penmanship, walk briskly but not hurriedly, and if they're socially ambitious, whistle tastefully. Whistling, once a casual pastime of shepherds and board apprentices, has now found a home in polite society. It's no longer the thing you do when you're waiting for a train. It's something you practice in front of a mirror, sometimes with a piano accompanist. It's performance art, but somehow daintier. Gentlemen of the middle and upper classes don't just whistle for fun. They whistle to demonstrate control of breath, command of melody, and, let's be honest, a slightly ridiculous level of self-seriousness. They gather for whistling evenings, like your great uncle might have 4 lawn bowls or bridge. They read little booklets with names like The Art of Elegant Whistling and debate, quietly but firmly, whether wet lip or dry produces a cleaner tone. Historians still argue whether these whistling events were genuinely respected by the broader public, or if they were more of a genteel One thing is clear: for a few decades, to be a truly polished man meant mastering a skill that involved no words, no instruments, and critically no sudden movements. You sip your imaginary tea. It is, of course, lukewarm. The kind that tastes faintly of paper and modest aspirations. Whistling, in this time, is not for the loud or the flashy. It is quiet, polished, often accompanied by light applause and the occasional murmur of exquisite phrasing, or a trifle sharp on the high E, but spirited. There's no microphone, no recording, only the room, the performer, and the tension of a missed note that will vanish into silence like fog over a lake. You start to notice the nuances, the tilt of the head, the posture. One particularly refined gentleman uses a small handkerchief folded just so to dab the corners of his mouth between movements, like a maestro attending to a Stradivarius. A fringe pamphlet from 1909 claims that a well-bred whistle may soothe a restless baby, charm a canary, or tame the harshness of a mother-in-law. Bold claims, unproven, naturally. But who are you to argue with science? Tonight's audience leans forward in their high-collared shirts and floral gowns, utterly still. Outside, a horse snorts somewhere down the street, and a gas lamp flickers like it's getting in the mood. Inside, the competition begins. A small silver bell is rung. The next contestant, a rail-thin man with a face like a Victorian hat stand, takes his place by the upright piano. He nods politely, then launches into a whistle-only arrangement of the Londonderry air. The first note is so clear, so sharp, it seems to hang in the air like a feather caught in sunlight. Somewhere, a dog perks up 2 blocks away. The room is silent except for the occasional creak of a corset, or the faint rustle of a monocle being adjusted. Everyone here knows, the most important rule of the Edwardian whistling contest is never applaud until it's over. This is, after all, a high art. You feel sleepy. Maybe it's the slow rhythm of the melody. Maybe it's the warmth of the room. Or maybe it's the fact that this whole thing feels like it's happening inside a teacup dream. There's a bit of muttering after the final phrase. Someone thought he rushed the coda. Another claims he spotted a slight tongue flutter. That bordered on vulgar. But it's all terribly civil. The audience sips tea and prepares for the next performer, and you, somewhere in the quiet corners of your own mind, begin to realize that yes, people really did this. They trained for this. They competed for this. And not once did they question whether it was a strange way to spend a Saturday night. You adjust your imaginary cuffs and shuffle slightly in your well-worn velvet armchair as the next contestant clears his throat knot to speak. Mind you, but to signal readiness. In Edwardian whistling circles, throat clearing is practically a pre-performance ritual. It's the gentleman's version of a curtain rising. You're still nestled in that same smoky parlor. The wallpaper, politely floral. The audience expectantly still. The man about to perform tonight is Mr. Frederick Hollingsworth Smith, railway inspector, known locally for his 3-octave range and ability to whistle the overture from the Mikado without so much as breaking a sweat. This evening, however, he's decided to perform something slightly more restrained, a slow whistled lullaby supposedly learned from his grandmother, who insisted it had once soothed Queen Victoria's lapdog to sleep. You raise an eyebrow at this. So does the piano accompanist, who looks like he hasn't slept since the Boer War. The audience nods in appreciation as the melody begins. It's haunting in its simplicity, the high notes crisp, like fresh linen. Whistling, in the Edwardian sense, isn't about volume or speed. It's about grace. Smooth transitions. Steady breath. The ability to hit a high C without sounding like a boiling kettle. By 1905, whistling has grown far beyond a household amusement. It's an actual pursuit, quiet, yes, but deeply competitive in its own oddball way. Men, always men, at this stage practiced for hours each week. There were mirror drills, breath-holding exercises, and even special waxes made to soften the lips during long rehearsal sessions. One apocryphal tale claims a Devonshire man soaked his lips nightly in milk and rosewater to prevent chapping. Did it work? Historians still argue whether such treatments improved tone or simply helped one smell delightful while failing to hit a trill. What's certain is that whistling was, for a brief moment in this starched collar society, a mark of polish and panache. To whistle with flair was to say, yes, I may work in timber import, but listen to my rendition of Greensleeves. You imagine yourself at a gentleman's club, cushioned seats, heavy velvet curtains, and the occasional grunt of approval from behind a copy of the Illustrated London News. There, someone drops the name Bertram Cowley, and everyone nods. Cowley is famous in the circuit for his specialty, military marches rendered entirely through lip pursing and nasal airflow. Not everyone admires him. One letter to the editor of the Croydon Clarion accused him of over-ornamentation, unbecoming of the national anthem. But these men take it seriously. Just as lawn bowling demands etiquette, and chess requires discipline, whistling insists on stillness inner and outer. One man, reportedly, lost a regional competition because his toe tapped too loudly during a flourish. Scandalous. You glance across the parlor and notice a few telltale signs of the elite whistler. The moistening orange wedge, discreetly tucked into a handkerchief. A small vial of lip balm with a monogrammed cap. A scrap of sheet music annotated, with cryptic notes like hold longer, vibrate subtly, or do not glance at Mrs. Pennington. She laughs. Historians agree that these contests were part of a broader Edwardian appetite for the peculiar. This is, after all, the same era that gave rise to bicycle-blended tea, spoon-collecting leagues, and competitions to grow the longest parsnip. Whistling slotted in perfectly polite, slightly absurd, and just demanding enough to reward obsession, without ever veering into vulgarity. But not just anyone could compete. To be considered for the larger competitions, you needed two references, one from your local music society and another from an established whistling figure, usually bearing a name like Lord Appledown or Sir Victor Humbleford, K.B.E. The letters were not formality, they were gatekeeping. They ensured the tone of the evening remained well in tune. A program from a 1908 contest in Cheltenham lists the categories: sacred, classical, comic, and the ever-ambitious ornithological mimicry. Each category had its own tempo, expectations, and appropriate dress codes. Comic whistlers, for example, were encouraged to wear a cheerful waistcoat, though no facial expressions were permitted during performance. This was meant to keep the focus on the sound and prevent unnecessary because laughter, while allowed at intermission, was not to interfere with the art. You might chuckle now, but then, you aren't wearing a detachable collar and trying to whistle Ave Maria with the solemnity of a monk. One flyer from the time mentions a man named Edgar Smith, who was disqualified for using ducre-assisted vibrato, a frowned-upon technique involving subtle manipulation of the cheeks. His protest letter, preserved in a modest archive, reads, "If the Almighty intended us not to enhance tone through digits, why then the Lord gave us lips at all, I do not know." A compelling point, rejected, of course. Outside, a fog has settled over Edwardian rooftops. Horses clop by slowly, gas lamps hiss and flicker. And in parlors across the country, soft whistles carry through the walls like echoes of a forgotten charm. You imagine practicing in front of a mirror by candlelight, your reflection squinting back in disapproval as you mangle the bridge of Rule Britannia. It's slow work, frustrating, sometimes. But when it goes right, when the pitch is clean, and the note seems to hang perfectly in the quiet of a late November evening, there's a kind of magic to it, even if no one outside the parlor knows your name, even if the prize is just a modest tin cup, or a small brass badge that says Whistling Club, 3rd class. To be a whistler is to exist in your own delicate bubble of sound and poise, and in Edwardian England, that was often enough. The competition continues, and you're still in your seat, maybe a little sunk deeper into the cushions now. Your eyelids are heavier, but you're far from bored. Oddly soothed, perhaps, by the rhythm of this peculiar little world, where men strive not to shout, but to whistle with elegance. The tone shifts slightly as the next event of the evening begins, not just another solo performance, but a duet. Ah yes, the rare and delicate art of Edwardian whistling in pairs. The MC, a man with a voice like warm marmalade and sideburns you could hide a coin in, announces the piece, a whistled rendition of Mendelssohn's Spring Song. One man will take the melody, the other, harmony. They both nod solemnly, adjusting their vests with the gravity of undertakers. This, you learn, is more than mere entertainment. It's part of a larger phenomenon, the rise of the Edwardian whistling circuit. By the early 20th century, whistling contests have graduated from parlor amusement to small-town sensation. Community halls, church basements, even seaside bandstands begin hosting formal whistling nights. Winners receive tiny silver spoons. Losers receive polite applause and the long walk back to obscurity. Programs are printed in advance. Judging rubrics are debated in committee. There's even talk of standardizing categories across the country, although, as with most things in Edwardian England, standardizing means everyone continues doing exactly what they like, just with a letterhead. Still, the circuit grows. Brighton has a particularly competitive scene, with at least 3 rival whistling leagues by 1907, each accusing the others of leniency, favoritism, or excessive vibrato. In Manchester, the public library once hosted a regional final where the audience was politely asked to sit on hand-embroidered cushions to avoid chair squeak distractions. Historians still argue whether this escalation was organic or the result of a few overly ambitious music teachers with too much time on their hands. Either way, by 1908, local newspapers are routinely publishing competition results alongside cricket scores. You picture the headlines. Whistling triumph in Leeds. Local man recreates Nightingale with just 2 lips, tea and tension. Harrogate hostess collapses during Tide's semi-final. There is, curiously, no official governing body for competitive whistling. Yet certain names emerge again and again, men who travel from town to town, a little suitcase of sheet music and lemon pastilles in tow. They're small-town celebrities, they sign programs. They receive small favors from landladies. Some, it's whispered, even have groupies, though what that means in 1906 is anyone's guess. In these contests, performance order is drawn from a velvet pouch. Seating is assigned. No one may whistle within 100 feet of the judging table outside of their designated time. That rule came after a particularly chaotic evening in Bath, when 2 contestants were caught warm-up whistling Greensleeves near the ticket line, confusing the judge and causing a misscore that haunts the club's minutes to this day. And the judges themselves, a fascinating lot. Usually retired music instructors, choir directors, or occasionally someone's very stern aunt, with a good ear for purity of tone. They sit behind doilied tables with clipboards and mint tea, rating competitors on pitch, breath control, phrasing, tone, posture, and grace of presentation. That last category is key. You can hit every note perfectly and still lose to a man who bows more gracefully, holds his hands in the correct rest position, and never once lets his upper lip tremble. The culture is, in its own absurd way, rigorous. Whispered traditions abound. A slice of orange before a performance to freshen the lips. Never wearing red socks, too distracting. Some believe whistling is best done in a 3-piece suit, while others argue for the breath-expanding freedom of loose waistcoats. And don't even get the Leeds Society started on the proper way to whistle Mozart. They've split over it before. You lean back, imagining the camaraderie, the slow-burning rivalries. A man who once borrowed your lemon balm now refuses to meet your gaze during the Skyboat song. Another insists your signature trill is a little too modern. You quietly vow to best him in the folk ballad division. And the music itself, surprisingly wide-ranging. While popular songs and light opera arrangements are common, the more ambitious whistlers attempt full classical pieces. Beethoven's Fifth, whistled in minor key, remains the gold standard, but the audience isn't always so lofty in their tastes. One competitor lost his round in Scarborough simply because the audience couldn't stop giggling during his rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel. He had perfect technique, just unfortunate timing. Still, the whistling circuit grows. Letters arrive, weekly, asking for rules, judging criteria, and sample programs. By 1910, a London-based enthusiast named Horace Pimbleton is printing monthly pamphlets titled The Whistler's Chronicle, foring breath exercises, tongue position diagrams, and an editorial column devoted entirely to the ethics of humming. During rehearsals, it runs for 11 issues before Pimbleton is struck in the temple by an airborne paper fan during intermission, and retires in protest. What remains from this golden age of competitive whistling? A few preserved programs, some surviving photographsmen frozen mid-pucker, eyes closed and glistened, 1 or 2 warped shellac recordings that sound, from a distance, like wind flirting with a garden hose. But tonight, here in the parlor, none of that matters. Another gentleman steps forward. His name is Alistair Pendleton Brow. He has an elaborate side part and a known fondness for lemon sponge. He adjusts his lapels and nods to the pianist. The first note of his performance, a gentle whistled version of Abide With Me, softly into the air like candle smoke, and as the final phrase hovers on a high, sweet G, you let yourself drift just a little deeper into the velvet evening. It's intermission now, though no one dares call it that. In Edwardian whistling circles, it's the interval, a brief, tie-soaked moment of quiet comparison, modest boasting, and very careful biscuit consumption. You wander slowly. The refreshment table, where dainty sandwiches are stacked like architectural models and teacups, clink with the soft urgency of people determined to seem unhurried. Nearby, A man in a paisley cravat is quietly demonstrating his signature low trill. To an intrigued listener using a slice of orange as a lip moisten, ERD. Welcome to the curious world of personal style in whistling, where mustaches are strategic, breathing is choreographed, and the slightest twitch of an eyebrow can be a bold artistic statement. You return to your seat, now aware that every performer you've seen tonight has not only spent hours practicing scales, they've also cultivated a look. Mustaches, for instance, are a topic of some controversy. Historians still argue whether a waxed mustache was truly advantageous for producing a clean tone, or if it was simply part of the Edwardian aesthetic code like monocles, or naming your son Reginald. What's known is this. Competitive whistlers groomed with intent. Some preferred neatly parted hair, lightly oiled to prevent distracting movement. Others practiced whistling in front of mirrors, specifically to eliminate unnecessary facial motion, a flash of eyebrow, a crease of nostril. All of it mattered. You watch as one of the younger competitors dabs the corners of his mouth with a velvet handkerchief. He checks his pocket watch, then retrieves a tiny tin of lip tonic. Its label printed in swirling copperplate script, for a gentleman's glide. He applies it with solemnity. His lips shine faintly under the gas. You feel a strange second-hand anxiety. Is your own lip regimen up to snuff? Whistling is a performance, yes, but also a presentation. This becomes especially obvious in signature pieces, where competitors not only whistle well, but imprint their own flourishes, specific pauses, slight shifts in pitch, even dramatic gestures of the hand, though anything too theatrical risks point deductions for showboating. In this section of the contest, personal flair takes center stage. Enter Sir Lionel Thistleby, a man known both for his gliding whistle tone and his insistence on beginning every performance with a long, reverent bow to the piano. Tonight, he wears white gloves, which he promptly removes finger by finger and folds neatly beside his sheet music. He will perform a medley of Victorian lullabies. By the end of the second phrase, two elderly ladies in the third row have already nodded off success, and then there's Gerald Wooten Price, who incorporates a subtle sway of the upper torso, barely noticeable, but always in time with the music. It's earned him quiet derision from purists, but raucous admiration from the younger crowd. He refers to it as international choreography. You wonder if he made that phrase up just to impress someone named Millicent. Within the circuit, personalities blossom and clash. Some men are fiercely traditional, wedded to method books and strict tempos. Others flirt with modernity, sneaking syncopation into their renditions, or gasp attempting foreign melodies. One gentleman once whistled a Hungarian folk tune and was briefly barred from the Yorkshire finals. Too exotic? Apparently still, there's room for experimentation. As long as it's done tastefully, and tasteful is everything here. From cut to phrasing, from pomaded hair to pre-performance silence, it all builds the whistler's identity. You can be remembered for a perfect legato line, or for the tiny silver dove pin you wear on your lapel, a nod to your specialty in birdsong mimicry. One pamphlet from the 1910 Edinburgh Whistling Jubilee includes helpful tips for competitors. Avoid garlic within 24 hours of contest. Do not whistle with gloves on, no matter how cold the hall. Use of a mirror during practice is encouraged, but not during performance, considered vain. If nervous, press tongue lightly to the roof of the mouth and imagine you are drinking weak chamomile. This advice, while charmingly specific, reveals the deep investment competitors placed in their craft. They weren't just blowing air through puckered lips. They were cultivating a brand. Some had calling cards printed. Mr. Alaric Pentlow, tenor whistler, classical and sacred programs. Another had monogrammed silk sashes, one for each musical category. These were draped ceremoniously over the back of his chair before each performance. It sounds theatrical, and it was, but also deeply sincere. There's a sort of charming fragility to it. These men weren't chasing wealth or fame. They weren't on posters. They weren't heard on the wireless, not yet, anyway. They were known to their communities. Maybe once, in a letter from a cousin in Kent. Maybe someone in a tea room in Bath said, "You must hear his rendition of Jerusalem Pure Velvet." As the interval ends, you catch sight of a small group in the corner, chuckling gently. There, watching a man attempt to sip tea while warming up with soft lip trills. He fails, spills slightly, and dabs at his waistcoat with theatrical grace. A ripple of laughter moves through the crowd, not cruel, just amused. These contests, for all their formality, have a kind of familial warmth to them. You return to your seat, the lights dim slightly, and a hush falls. The next performer approaches. He's modestly dressed, with a small flower tucked into his lapel. No gloves, no theatrics. But, as he begins just the first 5 notes of Danny Boy, carried gently. On the breath, you realize, he doesn't need flair. He's got tone, and in Edwardian England, tone is everything. You exhale softly, matching the long sighing note of the gentleman on stage. His whistling fades, and the room settles into a familiar quiet. Not quite silenced, there's always the gentle rustle of skirts, the clink of a teacup being cautiously returned to its saucer, but the kind of respectful hush that follows a well-whistled ballad. Someone murmurs, "Lovely," as though afraid to scare the sound away. Tonight, we're visiting one of the circuit's more legendary venues, the Whistling Society of Bath. Founded in 1898 by a former music professor and 2 amateur ornithologists, the society quickly became the most prestigious whistling club in the British Isles, an elite, slightly eccentric fraternity where tone, tact, and top notes ruled. Located in a modest Georgian townhouse just off the Royal Crescent, the society's headquarters boasts a parlor designed specifically for optimal acoustics. The ceiling is high, the wallpaper soft-textured, and there are no ticking clocks. A grandfather clock in the hallway, silenced during performances by removing its pendulum. Such is the commitment to clarity. The entrance hall displays a row of engraved brass plaques listing past champions. Names like Percival, Addleton, Giles Smith Harrow, and the ever-mysterious Miss E. of Tunbridge Wells, the only woman ever to reach the society's semi-finals. More on her later. You glance around the room. It's decorated with framed sheet music, faded concert programs, and, most curiously, a taxidermied lark in a glass case. According to local law, it once responded to a rendition of Morning Has Broken by bobbing its head 3 times. Whether this was an act of approval or confusion remains unclear. Historians still argue whether the bird was alive at the time, but, tonight, there's no controversy. The crowd gathers, respectable in gloves and polished boots. A small brass sign beside the stage reads, "Please muffle all coughs in handkerchiefs." The evening begins, as it always does, with the ceremonial lighting of the sconces and the society's signature toast, "To breath well used, and lips well placed." The first performer is a veteran member, known for his renditions of English madrigals and a slightly arched left eyebrow that seems permanently poised in judgment. He performs Flow My Tears with such mournful precision that you begin to feel slightly guilty, though you're not sure for what. As he finishes, a small bell chimes, and the audience gives a single round of finger snaps, a society tradition meant to show appreciation without disturbing the air with vulgar clapping. It's oddly effective. Next up, the society's youngest member, a boy of 12, known only as Toby. He steps forward nervously, holding a well-themed copy of favorite folk tunes for the cultivated whistler. He delivers a tremulous, but determined, version of the Ashgrove. There's a wobble on the high D, and a too quick breath before the bridge, but the room silently wills him through. When he finishes, the applausenaps are warm, genuine. A woman in the 3rd row dabs her eyes with a lace handkerchief. His father was tone-deaf, someone whispers. What makes the Bath Society stand out isn't just its prestige, it's its rules. Detailed, ornate, unyielding. Contestants may not perform more than twice in a single evening. All pieces must be approved by the Society's music archivist. Whistling of novelty tunes is discouraged unless presented with formal preface, and, perhaps most importantly, no member shall criticize another's vibrato, unless invited to do so in writing. via the designated suggestion book which resides under lock and key in a drawer, labeled Caution, Opinions. The Society also boasts a rare achievement, the successful recreation of an entire 4-part choral PSO, Magnum, Mysterium using only for whistlers and a sympathetic organist. The performance lasted just under 11 minutes, and was described in the Bath Gazette as both moving and mildly unnerving. A quote from the conductor reads, "There was a moment in the second stanza where I felt lifted, as if on a warm current of air, or possibly it was a draught from the fireplace." The Whistling Society of Bath has seen its share of eccentric legends. There's the tale of Mr. Ambrose Nettlefield, who insisted on rehearsing exclusively at dawn to capture morning clarity of tone, or Dame Judith Baroclo who, though not officially a member, once stood in for a sick contestant and whistled God Save the Queen so flawlessly that 3 judges fainted, allegedly, and we can't forget the infamous feather incident of 1911, in which a competitor's overly dramatic flourish caused a feather from his boutonniere to fly into the face of another contestant mid-performance. The resulting cough disqualified both parties, and for years afterward, feathered accessories were banned from the premises. Even within this refined setting, passions sometimes ran hot, though always behind a veil of civility. One letter from a disgruntled runner-up reads, "While I bear Mr. Cattermole no ill will, I question whether his rendition of Rule Britannia may not have involved an unannounced humming accompaniment. I humbly submit this observation, not out of spite, but in defense of clean technique." You're beginning to realize that competitive whistling, at its core, was about more than notes. It was about community, routine, a kind of shared dream world. Built on pitch and politeness, there's something oddly comforting about it. The predictability of the schedule, the rituals, the faint floral scent of hair pomade and tea, the unspoken understanding that, for this one evening, everything is tuned to the same key, and so. As the evening draws to a close, the president of the society, an elderly man with a voice like crushed velvet, takes the stage to whistle a closing number. It's simple, no frills, just a gently whistled rendition of Auld Lang Syne. You imagine the crowd, heads bowed, hands folded, no clapping, just one last round of polite snaps, and the soft shuffling of coats as everyone heads into the night. Outside, the cobblestones are slick with fog, the gaslights hum, and from somewhere down the lane, you hear a lingering whistle, clear, warm, and just a little melancholy. You stretch your legs beneath the stiff folds of an imaginary wool blanket as we ease into the next scene, a chapter from whistling history steeped in melodrama, mystery, and one extremely suspicious backstage cough. The year is 1904. The venue, the Market Hall in Derby. The event, the East Midlands semi-finals of the National Whistling Series. You're seated near the back, sipping tepid lemon water, blissfully unaware that you're about to witness the great Songbird controversy. Our story begins innocently enough. The crowd is large, but hushed, fans clutched, programs folded precisely into thirds. Everyone's here to see Horace Linley, known across 5 counties as the Skylark of Nottingham. He's lean, he's pale, and he can mimic 12 bird species using only his lips and his considerable nose. His rivals grumble, but Horace is undeniably gifted. His rendition of the linnet's mating call once made a real linnet at the Botanic Gardens flap directly into a teacup. Whether the bird was responding to passion or panic remains unclear. Historians still argue whether mimicry of wild birds ought to be considered performance or provocation. Tonight, Horace is scheduled like classic move for dramatic effect. He enters in a moss-green waistcoat with embroidered feathers on the cuffs. His hair has been combed, then deliberately mussed, as though to suggest he awoke in a field of daffodils and simply wandered on stage. He begins with a warbler's trill clean, confident. He follows with a goldfinch's staccato chatter, and then the piece de resistance, a seamless transition into the fluting call of the wood thrush. It's too good. People begin to shift in their seats. You lean forward, squinting. Something's odd. The sound is not just accurate, it's pristine, like gramophone-level clarity. You glance toward the judges, who now wear expressions you could politely call perplexed, but more accurately, might be extremely alarmed while trying not to spill one's tea. Then it happens, a faint squeak from behind the curtain. The kind of squeak you don't expect at a whistling contest. The kind of squeak that sounds suspiciously like a flute. Gasps flutter through the room like startled pigeons. Eyes widen, just slightly. The judges exchange glances. Someone whispers, "Mechanical assistance," which, in Edwardian performance etiquette, is just shy of witchcraft. The event is halted. The curtain is drawn. Behind it stands Horace's younger brother, Edgar, holding a small recorder. Not even a flute, a recorder. The shame is palpable. To be clear, Edgar wasn't playing the entire piece. No, he was only helping with the harmonics, according to the brothers' later letter of apology. But the damage is done. Horace is stripped of his honorary Skylark ribbon. The judges convene for nearly 2 hours in a side room furnished with sponge cake and disbelief. In the days that follow, the story spreads like jam on hot toast. The Derbyshire Whistler runs a front-page editorial titled "Fraud in Feathers." One letter to the editor simply reads, "If we allow flutes in whistling, what next? Oboes at arm wrestling." Horace disappears from the circuit. Edgar is never seen again. Rumors fly. Some say they fled to Scotland. Others insist they rebranded as a novelty act under the name The Beak Brothers. There is no conclusive evidence. Just an odd footnote in an otherwise decorous sport. And yet the incident leaves a mark. The Whistling Federation of Northern Counties, a name grander than its actual membership, swiftly drafts a new regulation. No performer shall be assisted, prompted, or acoustically enhanced by human or mechanical means, including but not limited to flutes, recorders, phonographs, or parlor parrots. Yes, parlor parrots. Because, as the minutes state, someone once tried to train a talking bird to whistle harmony. It didn't go well. The bird broke into a shrieking rendition of "God Save the Queen" halfway through Scarborough. Farron had to be removed in a hatbox, but even with new rules in place, the damage to the bird mimicry division is done. For a while, whistlers are hesitant to perform avian pieces. One man abandons his crow call routine entirely, switching to Anglican hymns and never looking back. Yet, like most strange events in Edwardian culture, the controversy eventually becomes folklore. The rules remain, but the tension fades. By 1912, a new performer, Anisthalia Griggs of Surrey's charming audiences with her interpretation of the lark ascending. Entirely unassisted, and entirely adored. Still, every so often, a knowing look passes between judges when a mimic is too good. A faint clearing of the throat, a small note scribbled. Suspicious clarity. No visible breath, but no more flutes. No more Edgars. Just one glittering scandal that reminds everyone, whistling, though quiet, is not without drama. And you're curled up now, maybe more amused than before, lulled by the idea that in an age of empire, telegrams, and bicycles with names like the Resolute, a tiny recorder caused the social equivalent of an earthquake. The curtains close. The programs are folded, and Horace Linleyfraud, or innovator, depending who you ask, fades into the silent wing of whistling history. You open your eyes just a little and the scene has shifted again. The hall is quieter now, deeper in the evening. A soft rain taps against the windows like someone politely requesting admission to the past. The performances continue, of course steady, solemn, but the room itself has taken on that velvety hush you only get after hours of shared listening. This is the late round, sometimes called the quiet set. It's when the flashier contestants have already played their hand, and what remains are the thoughtful whistlers, the ones with the control, the emotion, the restraint. Tonight's focus is a particularly niche specialty: whistling lullabies. Yes, lullabies, the soft, slow tunes mothers once hummed in gaslit nurseries, now resurrected through practiced lips and deliberate pacing. You wouldn't think it dramatic, but here, it's treated like a sacred rite. A man named Mr. Howard Trimington is announced, and a gentle ripple moves through the audience. He's known for his lullaby selections, especially those from the Scottish Highlands. He steps forward, expression serene, holding a folded handkerchief in one hand, not for sweat, but for focus. It's embroidered with the initials of his late wife, who, rumor has it, once accompanied him on piano for Mockingbird before she fell asleep halfway through the second verse. He considers that his greatest performance, the pianist nods. The first notes of Suogan Beginner Welsh lullaby, so tender it practically folds the room in half. And when he begins to whistle, it's not even sound at first, just breath, barely there. You feel it more than hear it. Like someone exhaling the memory of a song. This is whistling's quietest form and, arguably, its most emotionally dangerous. See. Lullabies demand vulnerability. Unlike marches or bird calls, there's no room to hide in technical flourish. Each note is exposed, fragile, and echoing. A slight pitch wobble feels like heartbreak. A breath taken too soon ruins the illusion of timelessness. Trimington makes no such error. He lets the melody hang, suspended, each note dissolving softly before the next arrives. You could fall asleep right there, if you didn't have such an inexplicable interest in historical men, whistling Victorian sleep songs in front of strangers. Lullaby rounds weren't always part of competitions, you learn. They began quietly an optional cool-down bracket, introduced by the Sussex chapter of the National Whistling Union in 1902. The idea was to end each contest on a soothing note, and perhaps help the more elderly attendees avoid overstimulation. From the earlier comic marches and Hungarian folk showcases, but the tradition grew quickly. By 1906, most respectable whistling leagues included a lullaby round, and in many circles, it became the most coveted slot, not the showstopper at 8 p.m., but the final whispered song at 10:30. When the oil lamps are turned low and someone in the back has already started dozing under a borrowed shawl, the audience expectations change during these moments. No one dares cough. Even shifting in one seat feels wrong. One contestant famously paused his lullaby midway through because someone dropped a lemon drop. The sound echoed so sharply that it was recorded in the judge's notes as confectionery interference. You learn that lullaby whistlers often trained at night after their children were asleep, after the fire was low. They practiced not for applause, but for peace. Their pieces weren't about showing off range, they were about stillness. Breathing in time with imagined rocking chairs. One favorite among Edwardian audiences was Golden Slumbers, often whistled with such delicacy that listeners described it as barely a song, more like wind remembering a melody. Another popular choice, Lavender's Blue, performed in a slow descending whistle that made several elderly judges nostalgic enough to award extra points they later admitted were purely sentimental. There were technical tricks, of course, holding a note across 3 bars without tremor, controlling vibrato so gently it sounded more like trembling than ornamentation, and the famous fade-out, where the final note is slowly backed away from the microphone or, in most cases, the air itself, until nothing remains but silence. Historians still argue whether the lullaby rounds were judged too subjectively. After all, how do you quantify soothing energy, or brought a tear to Mrs. Haddington's left eye? But most agreed that if a lullaby moved even one person to a gentle sigh or slow blink, it had achieved its purpose. Tonight's final lullaby contestant is a surprise. An unannounced entry, Miss Cecily Broadbeam. You remember her name. She's been seated quietly throughout the evening, wearing a pale lavender dress and a modest string of pearls. No fanfare, just a slightly nervous energy and a small rolled-up piece of paper clutched like a promise. She takes the stage. No pianist. No introduction. Just her lips, and breath, and the first delicate line of Hushaby. Don't you cry, it's perfect. You feel it in your chest first, then behind your eyes, then in that part of your memory where lullabies live, nestled beside childhood fears and candle shadows. It's not about the notes, it's about the gentleness. Her sound is pure, but not showy. Simple, but not plain. As she finishes, the room remains utterly still. No finger snaps, no whispered praise, just the sound of the rain outside, and the deep hush of people who know they've just heard something real. By now, the air in the concert hall is thick with lavender water and memory. You can almost taste the starch in the starched collars, feel the scratch of wool trousers, hear the soft chime of a pocket watch snapped shut with finality, and yet more, because even after lullabies, even after the gentlest closing notes, some contests weren't quite done. There was still one final, oddly beloved tradition, the imitation round. You shift upright again, curious, not songs, not melodies, but sounds. Specifically, whistlers recreating sounds from daily Edwardian life, using only their mouths. It began as a novelty, of course, a lark. But, by the early 1900s, the imitation round had become a staple of the more experimental clubs, especially in smaller towns where imagination often filled in for formal training. The premise was simple. Each contestant selected or, in some cases, was a cinder sound effect. Then, using only whistling breath control, tongue placement, and sheer cheeky courage, they would attempt to bring it to life. The categories were delightfully strange, a train departing Euston Station wind through a keyhole, a bee trapped in a jam jar, the milkman's bicycle on cobblestone, grandfather sneezing in a pew. You can't make these up, or rather, they did. Tonight's round begins with a confident older gentleman in a paisley waistcoat. He bows, takes a moment, and then delivers his piece. Afternoon rain on a greenhouse roof. The opening is softer, delicate patter of repeated notes that somehow captures the irregular rhythm of droplets. Then, a crescendo. Then, a long, gentle sigh that suggests either the wind or a gardener giving up. The judges nod approvingly. One writes, evocative, slightly damp, well done. You glance at the crowd. They are leaning forward now, no longer sleepy but quietly thrilled. This isn't just music anymore. This is theater of the absurd, delivered through lips pursed with dignity. Next up, a nervous young man with spectacularly parted hair who announces, in the softest voice imaginable, my piece is titled Two Horses Arguing on a Hilltop. Risky choice. He begins with a series of staccato bursts clearly meant to suggest hoofbeats, followed by an ascending squeal that might, with imagination, resemble a horse's neigh. The second horse replies with a slightly more nasal tone. There's a moment of tension, then silence. Then one final drawn-out descending whistle that seems to say, fine, you win. The crowd loves it. Historians still argue whether these imitation rounds were intended to elevate the art form or simply lighten the mood, but either way, they were enormously popular. In York, there was an annual soundscape challenge in which performers were given a full scenario drawn from a hat. One 1909 account describes a whistler being tasked with a family picnic interrupted by geese. His piece began with a simple tune to suggest contentment on Ilkla Moor Bottet, abruptly interrupted by a chaotic series of ascending whistles and frantic trills, ending in a soft mutter and what the program described as resigned munching. He won third place. You learn that some contestants trained for months just for these performances. They would walk country lanes, cataloging the sound of boots on gravel, the wheeze of a bicycle chain, the distant bark of a carly. One man allegedly spent 4 days in his shed, whistling beside a kettle just to get the steam pitch right. There were, of course, limitations. Not every sound could be rendered convincingly, no matter how puckered the lips or how fluttered the breath. A famously ill-fated attempt to whistle a ship sinking at sea ended in uncontrollable audience laughter when the performer accidentally mimicked a goose's honk at the climax. He never competed again. Some imitation pieces were collaborative. At the Birmingham exhibition in 1907, 4 whistlers performed a sequence titled A Day in the Life of a Chimney Sweep, taking turns to whistle, the dawn bell bright, cheerful trill, the clatter of soot, falling short, descending bursts, the customer complaint, a reedy whine, and finally, the sweep's whistled sigh as he walked off into the fog, a long, soft G minor. It received a standing ovation, or as close to one as Edwardian audiences got some stood, and several gently nodded. The imitation round, while less formal, became something of a proving ground. Could you take the common and make it beautiful? Could you recreate the world? Not as it sounded, but as it felt. It wasn't about accuracy. It was about atmosphere. Tonight's final performer steps forward. Older, quiet, wearing a green tweed suit that's definitely seen better days. He doesn't announce his piece, he simply closes his eyes, breathes in slowly, and begins. The sound is soft at first, measured 2 notes, alternating, spaced like footsteps. Then a slow rise, a repeated flutter, a pause. You recognize it though. You don't know how. It's not a song. It's not even a memory. It's a scene. You're suddenly walking through a narrow Edwardian street at dusk. You hear a street lamp hiss to life. A child laughs faintly, somewhere behind a window. A cat rustles through dry leaves, and then nothing, just the whistle of wind through chimney pots. The performer bows. The room stays still for a moment longer. No title, no explanation, and somehow, that's perfect. The crowd, subdued now, in that sweet post-absurdity hush, slowly resets. Gloves are adjusted, necks gently rolled. You stretch your back slightly against an embroidered cushion that doesn't exist. We're still in this hall, still watching. Edwardian gentlemen purse their lips for glory. But the tone has shifted again, because now, at long last, it's time for the most infamously difficult category in the whistling world. The historical reenactment round. Yes, you heard that correctly. This is the portion of the evening where contestants attempt to recreate the sounds of history, using only their whistle and their imagination. There are no costumes, no props, just one performer, one mouth, and a century's worth of pressure. Tonight's first competitor in this round is a serious-looking fellow from Devon named Edwin Thackeray. His mustache is precise, his eyes intensely fixed. He walks to center stage, bows stiffly, and declares, "My piece is entitled, The Coronation of Henry VIII, as imagined by a slightly nervous herald." Already, you're intrigued. He begins. With a trumpet-like trill bright, sustained meant to mimic fanfare. It's a little sharp, but serviceable. Then a pause, followed by a lower, more uncertain warble. Like someone trying to announce something, but forgetting halfway through. A flurry of notes suggests an excited crowd. A sudden descending line indicates the arrival of something heavy, possibly the crown itself. Then, in an unexpected move, he adds a soft, breathy wheeze interpreted by one judge as the rustle of ermine. By the end, you're genuinely convinced a king has entered. The room gives a few bold finger snaps, and Mr. Thackeray bows deeply. The next performer tries something more daring. She's Miss Lydia Harcourtius, another woman in the mix tonight, and she approaches the stage with the confidence of someone who once whistled Rule Britannia backwards to win a bet. Her piece is the invention of the spinning jenny from the perspective of a curious mouse. It starts with small, chittering notes, rapid, squeaky, that evolve into a low, rhythmic pulsing meant to imitate the hum of spinning wheels. As the piece builds, the tempo increases. The mouse becomes frantic, then fascinated, then exhausted. There's a sudden high-pitched slide that somehow sounds like thread snapping, and just as it seems, the mouse might fall asleep in the machinery. Lydia ends the piece with a delicate sigh of air. The audience is spellbound. Historically, this round was divisive. Some traditionalists believed whistling should remain in the realm of music, not mimicry or interpretive storytelling. But others saw this category as the purest test of creativity, a place where personality and technical skill had to dance together, without stepping on each other's feet. One archived program from the 1908 Sheffield Whistling Summit includes an entry titled The Fall of Rome, a civic lament in 4 tones. It was performed by a man named Leonard Timms, who wore black armbands and requested complete silence from the room for 30 seconds after he finished. Reports suggest his closing note was so mournful that a judge excused himself to have a quiet sob behind a velvet curtain. Historians still argue whether this was caused by the music or the undercooked haddock served at supper. But regardless of the cause, the impact of these reenactment pieces lingered. They were harder to judge, more subjective, less melodic. But they made people feel. One of the most legendary performances in this category was the signing of the Magna Carta, a whispered whistle ballad, which began with soft rustling presumably followed by a firm descending scale that somehow suggested resignation, authority, and indigestion all at once. The performer, Reverend Otis Phelps, was said to have practiced the piece in his chapel after choir practice every Thursday for 5 months. Tonight's final act is a gentleman named Bertrand Moffat. He steps forward wearing a dark navy cravat. No lapel flower, no waistcoat embellishments. A minimalist. He does not announce a title. He simply begins, and immediately the air changes. The first notes are low, slow, and deliberate like the creaking of old ships. Then come sharp, staggered breaths, mimicking the cracking of ropes under tension. A slow rise in pitch follows, seagulls, perhaps, or sails catching wind. It's unmistakably nautical. Someone near you whispers, "Trafalgar." But then, a shift. The sound changes faster, chaotic, sudden disjointed notes, pitched high and sharp. You realize you're in battle. Cannons, but whistled. Shouting, but silent. The clash of forces reduced to a rising wave of breathy discord. And just as it builds to unbearable tension, the entire soundscape drops into a single, long, wavering note, pitched low and dying slowly. The ocean, after. He ends the piece with 2 small notes. One high, one lower. A flag lowered. A life remembered. No one speaks, not even the judges. You're stunned. It's absurd, of course. It's grown adults whistling sea battles in tweed jackets. But it's also deeply moving, intimate, honest. And somehow, this is what makes Edwardian whistling competitions so completely and inexplicably magical. Your eyes are drooping now. Maybe you've shifted to your side. The weight of the blankets has grown heavier, softer. But don't drift off just yet. We've reached perhaps the strangest part of the Edwardian whistling journey, the world of whistling duets. Yes, duets. You'd think that whistling, a pursuit so solitary, so inward, would resist collaboration. And it often did. But every so often, 2 bold souls would rise to the challenge of synchronized tone, shared breath, and the monumental task of not giggling while staring deeply into someone else's puckered face. The duet category first emerged, unofficially, in 1903 during the Dorset Gentlemen's Spring Exhibition, when 2 cousins, Rupert and Terence Fairweather, spontaneously whistled the Blue Danube together during intermission. According to newspaper accounts, it was described as surprisingly stirring, though slightly damp. The duo was invited to repeat the performance in the evening slot, this time officially, and the duet round was born. Tonight, the announcer speaks softly, almost reverently. Ladies and gentlemen, our next performance, a duet by Miss Dorothy Green and Mr. Neville Plum. A low murmur of interest follows. Dorothy and Neville have performed before and are rumored to be romantically entangled, at least united by a mutual fondness for barley, sweets and music hall tickets. They step forward together, careful not to trip over the hem of Dorothy's full-length dove-grey gown. They bow. They take their Markstry feet apart, with a single piano stool placed respectfully between them. Their piece, GreenslEEVES. From the first note, it's clear this isn't just a musical stunt, it's a conversation. Dorothy carries the melody, clear and silvery, while Neville weaves beneath her with a low, steady harmony. Their breaths match. Their vibrato matches. At one point, Dorothy pauses mid-phrase, and Neville carries the note in her absence, as if to say, "I've got you." It's terribly moving. Whistling duets are notoriously difficult. For one, the breath timing must be perfect. Unlike singers who can harmonize across lines or stagger phrases, whistlers are restricted by the mechanics of the mouth. 2 mouths, 2 tones, no room for chaos. Too much volume, and it becomes a mess. Too little, and the sound disappears. Historians still argue whether true harmony is even possible in duet whistling, or if it's simply the illusion of harmony caused by well-spaced tones and eager imaginations. But either way, the effect when it works is mesmerizing. In fact, The Royal Northern Whistling Circuit once held a full tournament devoted entirely to duets. The 1906 Pairing Cup drew over 40 teams. Most performances ended in mild disaster, overlapping breath patterns, misaligned tempos, one partner fainting from nervousness mid-greensleeves, but a few were extraordinary. Take, for instance, the Thompson twins, not actually twins, who performed Clair de Lune so precisely that one judge declared it better than the orchestral version. A remark that caused a minor scandal in the local Philharmonic. And there were comic duets too. Whistlers who traded phrases back and forth like an argument. One popular act, Mr. and Mrs. Spoonsby, performed a routine called domestic whistles, which included whistled sound effects of door slams, footsteps, and one very realistic impression of a grumpy cat. Critics adored them. Their marriage, however, did not survive the 1910 season. Tonight's duet continues. Dorothy and Neville navigate the coda of Greensleeves with the delicacy of a couple passing notes in church. There's no showboating, just unity. The final chord lingers a little too long, but the effect is dreamy. They finish. The room breathes again. There are whispered exclamations. A lace glove flutters to a face. A monocle is polished in disbelief. In the world of Edwardian whistling, a duet is like tightrope walking in tandem. And when done right, it carries the same thrill, danger, elegance, and a shared risk of embarrassment. And let's not forget the rare but legendary trio round. Now mostly outlawed for being a logistical impossibility, according to the 1911 Federation notes. One such trio, the Canary Gents, once attempted Pockerbell's cannon and accidentally collapsed into dissonance, so severe it was mistaken for an air raid drill. No one was harmed, except pride. Duets, then, were the perfect compromise, not too lonely, not too chaotic. Just two people in careful synchrony, held together by breath, tone, and a shared love for very specific public performances involving gentle mouth noises. As Dorothy and Neville step off stage, arm in arm, you feel something warm settle in your chest. Maybe it's admiration. Maybe it's the beginnings of sleep. Either way, the message is clear. Even in the softest corners of Edwardian life, there was room for connection, for teamwork, for tenderness, for perfect harmony built on breath alone. And with that, the final soloist of the evening is called. The room is dimmer now. The gas lamps are burning low, casting long shadows that stretch across the polished floorboards like sleepy arms reaching for the cloakroom. You imagine the scent of bergamot tea cooling in half-finished cups. Everyone is wedding quiet, still as the announcer gently clears his throat. Please welcome our final soloist of the evening, Mr. Percival Moss. A soft rustle passes through the room. Percival Moss isn't a household name, not like Addleton or the Beak brothers' infamy counts. But among serious whistling aficionados, he's something of a legend. Not for flamboyant technique or showmanship, but for something far rarer: consistency. For over a decade, Moss has placed within the top 5 of every major whistling event from Devon to Durham. Never first, never flashy, just unwaveringly excellent. He steps up to the stage with the solemn grace of a man who's walked this carpet 1,000 times before. He's tall, lean, with a slightly bowed posture that suggests he once grew too fast and never quite caught up with his own limbs. His hair is graying at the temples. His jacket is navy wool, impeccably pressed, with a tiny stitched badge. Whistling League of Sussex-1902. He gives a small bow. No introduction. No nod to the pianist, because he never uses one. Tonight's piece, The Forsaken Garden, an old Victorian ballad about love lost and ivy gained. A risky choice. Its winding melody requires long curved phrases and a control of tempo so delicate that most performers avoid it. One slip, and the whole thing wilts like the garden itself. But Percival doesn't slip. His first note is low, softer than you'd expect. It almost startles you, the way it enters the room without asking permission. It curves upward into the next tone, like ivy climbing brick. The melody loops back on itself again and again, each time quieter, more reflective. This isn't just music, it's melancholy made audible. He doesn't rush. At one point, midway through the third phrase, he pauses not from lack of breath, but out of intent. It's a moment of stillness so profound, the audience holds their own breath with him, not wanting to disturb the note that isn't even there yet. When it finally returns, softer, slower, lower, you feel it. A sigh across time. Historians still argue whether Moss's restraint was artistry or accident. One critic described his style as just shy of daring. Another called him a gentle disappointment. But those who truly listened understood, he wasn't performing to impress. He was performing to remember. See, as Mr. Moss lost his fiancée to tuberculosis in 1899. She'd been a violinist. They used to rehearse together on rainy afternoons in Brighton, her bow gliding while he whistled in counterpoint. She loved this song, The Forsaken Garden. He's performed it every season since her death, always at the end. Always without accompaniment. He finishes the piece not with a flourish, but with a whisper. His final note barely exists. Just breath shaped into something almost melodic. It vanishes before it lands, and for a long moment, no one moves. It's not about drama, not even grief. It's something gentler. The sense that a person has just laid something down on the stage, a memory, a promise, and quietly stepped back. The finger snaps come slowly, then rise. Not in volume, but in warmth. Even the judge with the monocle nods. As Moss bows and turns, he makes no eye contact. Just a hand to his chest and a faint smile, more to himself than the crowd. There's something deeply human about it. The way he owns the space without conquering it. The way his music doesn't demand your attention, it invites it, quietly. Like a letter left on the table with your name in perfect script. And just like that, the solo round is over. You exhale, realizing you'd been holding your breath. There's a rustling in the hall, as people lean back, stretch their arms. The end is near. But not quite. Because now comes the trophy ceremony, ritual. Almost as intricate as the contest itself. Prizes in Edwardian whistling were famously peculiar. There were the expected ribbons, yes, but also silver-plated tuning forks, engraved teaspoons, and in one notable case, an entire ham. Winners were rarely surprised. The scoring system was as transparent as a fogged-up monocle. 10 points for pitch, 10 for phrasing, 5 for innovation, 5 for charm. Charm was never defined, but judges often awarded it to anyone who made them smile, sigh, or remember their first waltz. The master of ceremonies, Mr. Benedict Floss, who resembles a decorative umbrella stand in both stature and rigidity, up and begins the roll call. Second runner-up, Miss Lydia Harcourt, for her spinning Jenny Mouse Fantasia. First runner-up, Mr. Neville Plum and Miss Dorothy Green. Jointly for their duet cue, tiny scandalized gasp from the single-category purists, and the winner, Mr. Percival Moss. No one claps. It's not that they disagree, it's that clapping feels wrong. Like waking someone who's only just drifted off. He accepts the trophy this year. A crystal paperweight in the shape of a treble clef and gives the same small bow. It's over. But somehow, not really, because something about the room has changed. Or maybe, it's you. The ceremony ends, but no one leaves right away. People linger reluctant to disturb the quiet spell that's fallen over the hall like a feather duvet. Parasols are collected without haste. Gloves are retrieved gently from pewter hooks. Even the pianist closes the lid of the instrument with a tenderness usually reserved for lullabies and goldfish funerals. And you're still nestled deep in this imaginary seat, tucked beneath an Edwardian silence, watching as the event eases into its final ritual, the informal farewell whistle. It isn't officially on the program, but everyone knows it's coming. It always does. A small group of contestants, usually the veterans, gather at the foot of the stage. No microphones, no judges. Just a semicircle of humans with puckered lips, and the mutual understanding that sometimes you whistle not to compete but to say goodbye. Tonight's farewell group includes Dorothy, still flushed from her duet. Mr. Trimington, clutching his embroidered handkerchief. Lydia Harcourt, with her nervous mouse confidence restored. And Jessie von Percival Moss, standing at the far end like a punctuation mark. They begin without cue. No announcement, just a single clear G note, held softly in the air like a question. And then another joins it. Then another. What emerges isn't a tune you can name, it's more like a fog of gentle tones, rising and falling like the breathing of a room. A lullaby without structure. A chorus of strangers who don't need lyrics to harmonize, it's almost impossible to describe. The sound seems to hover in the rafters, swirling slightly, like chimney smoke finding its way out. There are no solos, no dramatic gestures, just breath, pitch, and time. And somehow, it's the most beautiful thing you've heard all night. Historians still argue whether these farewells should be documented, or whether their magic lies in their transience. Many were never written down. No recordings exist, just newspaper mentions like, and at the close, a soft farewell was whistled by 6 performers. The audience wept quietly. It's part of what makes this tradition so human. It resists being saved. It asks to be remembered and forgotten all at once. You close your eyes. Behind your lids, the images rise again. Flutes behind curtains. Duets that sound like affection. A spinning Jenny squeak, Percival's breathless garden. You begin to understand what makes this strange little world so soothing. It isn't just the sound, it's the intention. Every whistle, no matter how odd or elaborate, is a soft insistence that someone, somewhere, took the time to shape silence into something kind. As the final notes of the farewell drift away, the performers open their eyes. A few nod to each other, some smile. One yawns, then they scatter. Back into coats and carriages, wool scarves, and steam-tinted windows. Back into a world where whistling is, once again, just a pastime. Not an art. Not a ritual. Just air-made music. You imagine Moss walking home, slow and unhurried, his breath visible in the gaslit fog. Maybe he whistles a little out of habit, not performance. Just a quiet melody for the night to carry away. As the hall empties, the caretaker dims the chandeliers one by one. A few crumbs are swept from the refreshment table. A half-empty teacup is left behind, its rim faintly puckered by lipstick, its saucer marked by a single sugar crystal the size of a beetle. And somewhere in the rafters, you could swear the air still hums. Outside, the night waits patiently. Damp, starless, perfectly ordinary. But in here, you've just spent 2 hours in the company of people who believed that whistling, not shouting, not singing, just whistling, could be enough. And maybe they were right. Outside the hall, rain has given way to mist. The cobblestones gleamed faintly in the light of gas lamps. And the distant clop of hooves echoes like a heartbeat slowed by contentment. You imagine yourself stepping out beneath an umbrella of damp wool pockets, stuffed with programs and crumpled peppermint wrappers, ears still ringing with ghost notes. But even now, the evening isn't quite finished, because in some Edwardian towns, after the official contest had concluded, a select few whistlers would gather for something almost mythic in its intimacy. The midnight whistling salon. Held in drawing rooms, libraries, or the quieter wings of local clubs. These gatherings were invitation-only affairs, softly lit, sparsely attended, and entirely off the record. There were no judges, no prizes. Just a few chairs, a sideboard with modest refreshments, usually sherry and sponge cake, and a handful of performers with music still left in them. You find yourself drifting into one of these salons now. The host, a widowed baronet with a fondness for birdsong and jam tarts, welcomes each guest with a firm handshake and the offer of a crocheted blanket. You accept, naturally. You're placed near the hearth, close enough to feel the radiant warmth, far enough not to scorch your shins. There's a sleepy-looking pug curled up on the rug nearby. He snores gently through his nose, blissfully unaware that his owners are recreating the Renaissance in a sharp minor. Tonight's program is improvised. No sheet music. No introductions, just whoever feels moved to perform. The first piece comes from Miss Evangeline Prout, who opens with a lullaby based on the call of a long-lost Cornish seabird. It's light, warbling, vaguely damp. The room responds not with applause but with satisfied nods and the quiet clink of teaspoons against saucers. Next is Mr. Julian Fetretide, undertaker. Part-time milk baron who whistles a funeral march he claims is not sad, just slow. It's oddly comforting, like someone telling you everything will be okay. Eventually, probably, just not this week. These salons had no official place in the records of the Whistling Federation. But they were treasured here. Performers could experiment, improvise, make mistakes. In one salon, a woman attempted to whistle both parts of a duet by rapidly alternating lips, a method that failed spectacularly but earned her the affectionate title of Mrs. Pink. There were themes, sometimes. One week, whistle what you remember from childhood. Another, famous belles of Europe. One daring night in 1908, they attempted the entire reign of Queen Victoria in 8 tones or less. Historians still argue whether these salons were spontaneous or secretly structured. Some believe they were rehearsed in private. Others insist they were purely improvisational, born of whim and sherry fumes. Either way, they offered something the competitions didn't. Freedom. The mood here is different. There's no tension, no scoreboard. Just the creak of a wicker chair, and the slow rise of a single note in the warm, lamplit dark. And perhaps, most importantly, there was listening. Not just hearing, but truly listening. When someone performed, no one filled the silence, no coughing, no side conversations. Just breath, and music, and the kind of hush that suggests something sacred, though no one would ever call it that out loud. Far too dramatic. You lean back. The blanket is warm now. Someone hands you a butter biscuit. The pug shifts in size. It is, without question, one of the most peaceful rooms you've ever imagined. At one of these salons, a performer once whistled the pattern of wind in her grandmother's curtains. Another recreated the pace of her father's pocket watch as he read the newspaper. Someone whistled a dream they couldn't quite remember. All were met with the same response. Quiet appreciation, and more sponge cake. You wonder if any recordings of these evenings exist. They don't, of course, not a single one. All lost to air and memory. But that's the point, isn't it? Some music isn't made to be saved. It's made to be shared, once, softly, and then surrendered to time. The final whistle of the evening belongs to Percival Mustaches again. This time, though it's not a song, it's a single note. Held, shaped, released, and somehow, it says everything. The salon ends with a round of tea and gentle yawns. Cloaks are gathered. Slippers are exchanged for boots. Someone sneezes and apologizes to the pug. The guests drift out, not so much walking as fading, and you stay behind. Just for a moment, because this room of quiet, shared sound fit, like the kind of dream you'd like to revisit again someday. The salon is behind you now, fading into misty memory. Outside, the Edwardian town lies hushed beneath early morning fog. Lamps flicker out one by one as milk carts begin their slow rounds. Somewhere, a cock crows late and indifferent. But your journey isn't quite done. Tonight, one final piece of this world remains to be explored. One quieter, stranger chamber in the Cathedral of Historical Absurdity. The Society of Whispered Whistlers. Yes, that was a real thing. And no, it's not a joke. Founded in 1906 by a group of music teachers, amateur philosophers, and at least one disgruntled librarian, the Society of Whispered Whistlers believed that loudness was vanity, and that true beauty lived in restraint. They held secret salons, smaller than the salons you've already visited, where performers were judged not by how loud or precise their tones were, but by how quietly they could be heard, and how deeply they could be felt. You're now walking, in imagination, up a narrow staircase into the back room of a tobacconist's shop in Bath. The room is dark. Velvet drapes cover the windows. On the far wall, a sign reads in embroidered script, "Only breath, only tone. Leave ego on the step." Everyone sits in chairs facing the middle, no stage, no hierarchy. The moment you enter, you feel your shoulders drop. The room smells of lavender oil, beeswax, and someone's woolen overcoat that should have been aired out days ago. You take a seat. The performance begins without introduction. A woman in a lace shawl raises her head and begins to whistle, not out loud, but into the palm of her gloved hand. The tone that emerges is barely audible, like breath passed over a bottle. You have to lean in to hear it. It's the musical equivalent of a secret. And somehow, it's beautiful. She's followed by a man who whistles an old hymn into the crook of his elbow, using the muffled resonance to soften the already hushed tone. It sounds like a tune remembered underwater. A third performer attempts a piece called Fog over Finchley. It's 5 minutes of tonal ambiguity, achieved by tilting his head at just the right angle to let sound escape sideways through his collar. One of the judges is said to have wept softly into a lace pocket square. The society had rules. No performances above a certain decibel. No audience response louder than a whisper. No shoes with hard sole squeaks were penalized. And above all, no clapping. The preferred response was the silent nod, or, in cases of particular excellence, the extended blink. Historians still debate whether this movement was serious avant-garde experimentation or an elaborate Edwardian prank. Regardless, it gained traction. Chapters sprouted in Bristol, Norwich, and briefly in Paris, where it was received with enthusiastic shrugs. Its motto, softly does it. One night, a man was disqualified for sneezing mid-performance. Another time, a woman received a standing ovation or would have had the society allowed standing. Instead, 12 seated nods were recorded in her honor. The incident is remembered as the quietest triumph. You find yourself smiling. Because here, in the dimmest corner of Edwardian absurdity, you've discovered something oddly touching. A group of people so committed to subtlety, to gentleness, to the fragile magic of sound barely born, that they built an entire art form around humility. It's not about who can hit the highest note. It's about who can do the least, most beautifully. As the salon concludes, each member stands and slowly retrieves their outerwear. Silence reigns. Even the clock on the mantel ticks apologetically. You leave the room gently, your footsteps matched to the hush of the hour. You glance back once, one last look, and the door closes without a sound. Back outside, the street is still quiet, but the sky is beginning to pale. The horizon has turned the color of milky tea. A few birds whistled, not expertly, not for show. Just because morning has come, and isn't that what it's always been about? A note passed between strangers, a sound shared without demand, a breath held, a tone released, and then silence. You pull your coat tighter. The chill is comforting. There are no more performances tonight. No more ribbons or rankings. Just the sound of your own breath and the soft, contented hum of sleep. Drawing near, somewhere perhaps someone else is whistling alone in their kitchen, and they don't even know they're part of something ancient and tender. You smile, because now, you do. There's barely any night left now. The gas lamps have flickered out entirely. Even the cobblestones look tired. You're wandering, slowly, through the final corners of Edwardian whimsy, past shuttered tea shops, past the brass plaque of the Whistling Society headquarters, past the echo of a note you can't quite remember, but don't worry. We have one last stop. It's a quiet garden. You didn't expect it. A small walled square tucked behind the music hall, reachable only by a narrow alley and a gate that creaks like a music teacher's knees. No signs, no guides, just instinct and perhaps a hint from a passing milkman. This is the Whistler's Rest Garden. It's real, or real enough by day. It's a modest place, clipped hedges, a bench or two, pigeons plotting crimes beneath the rosebushes. But by night, especially after competitions, it becomes something different, a haven, a place for the performers to come down from the stage and let the music linger just a little longer. No formal performances here. Just murmured notes beneath breath. Tiny tunes practiced into scarf wool. One whistler might try a few lines of something new. Another might simply sit, eyes closed, fingers tapping out a rhythm against their knee. Sometimes they whistle to each other, sometimes to no one. Sometimes not at all. The stories say that once, a gentleman named Elliot Finch composed an entire lullaby in this garden using only 3 notes, spaced 5 minutes apart. By the end, a robin had memorized it and became his unsolicited duet partner for life. Historians still argue whether this was possible or if Elliot just had a very musical bird, but either way, the feeling lingers. You walk slowly between the trimmed hedges, the gravel crunching softly beneath your imaginary boots. You pass a stone plaque that reads, "In praise of the smallest music." Below it, a wooden bench, worn smooth from years of thoughtful sitting. You settle in, and as you do, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear again not performance, not showmanship, but the music of the world when no one's trying. The breeze whistles faintly through a narrow alley. The flapping of a curtain mimics a distant trill. A kettle left too long sings the ghost of a tune. And from far off, someone walking home, absent-mindedly whistling nothing in particular just because it's habit, or comfort, or simply breath. It's here, in this in-between place, that the true heart of Edwardian whistling lives, not on stage, not in salons, but here between hedges, in slippers, surrounded by silence, under a sky that's slowly turning lavender at the edges. There's something beautifully fragile about it. This whole world. These evenings of puckered lips and quiet drama, of whispered notes and velvet programs. A history not written in battles or monarchs, but in tone, in pause, in playfulness. And you were here for all of it. You watched the duets dance. You sat through the whispered solos. You learned that someone once reenacted the invention of the spinning jenny as a whistled mouse. And somehow, it all made sense. Because in the end, all great history, even the boring kind, is really just the story of people trying to be heard in their own odd, brilliant, gentle way. And tonight, they were . So, if you find yourself ever lying in bed, unable to sleep, maybe try it. Purse your lips, choose a note, send it into the quiet. It doesn't have to be good, it doesn't even have to be music, just something honest. Because the Edwardians would have understood, and they would have nodded silently. You smile, still, seated in the garden that may or may not exist. The sky lightens by degrees. The world is waking up, but not you. You're drifting. You lean back, exhale slowly. Maybe one last, tiny whistle escapes you just for you. And with that, we'll let this strange, sleepy world fade. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the edges of your thoughts begin to blur, we'll leave Edwardian England behind, its music, halls and saloons, its embroidered programs and whispered tones. Let the images grow softer. The velvet cushions, the garden path, the glint of gaslight on brass buttons. Let them all fold quietly into the darkness behind your eyelids. There's no more stage, no more audience, no winners, no breath control, just you, your breath, your stillness. You don't need to remember every detail. The oddities, the footnotes, the pigeons with musical ambitions. All that matters is the feeling, that hush of warmth and wonder, that lightness in your chest, that calm that comes from knowing that somewhere, sometime, people gathered not to compete, but to connect. And if the world feels loud when you wake, you'll know there's a place, just here, waiting. With soft wool and candlelight, with lavender and sponge cake. With silence made sacred. Allow the last notes to fade into the distance. Let your breath slow, let your muscles release. And know that you've done enough tonight. Thought enough, imagined enough, now it's time to rest. The music is over, but the peace remains. Good night, friend.